Welcome back to Gerodynamics. Okay, so this is going to be a political video. It's also a response video, a response to a comment. I did respond to the comment in the comments, but I also wanted to do more of an in depth type of explanation. Also, I will continue on, I believe, to some of the other things that I do believe are benefits of the separation of states. So this obviously the comment is from that previous video where I talked about the possible benefits of a separation of states, and so this is kind of going to continue on with that because I do believe I missed some. Quite a few. There's no way I can cover all the benefits, but I missed some important ones that I'm going to clarify in my response, and then also some other ones that if they weren't addressed in the previous video, they're new. If they were addressed, then I'm just kind of going over them again, doing some extra clarification because they're coming to me as I do these videos. Okay, so let me go over the comment real quick. Um, the comment was civil separation. This is a terrible, terrible idea. It would leave the greatest nation in the world a shattered mess. This would literally deliver every one of America's enemies what they want most. A terrible, terrible idea. All right, now that I've said that, I love this video. It is courageous to discuss a bold idea openly. You presented your idea well and respectfully. And this is most thoughtful discussion of what A24's Civil War is actually about that I have seen, and I watched a lot of content on the film and saw the film twice. Thank you for your thoughts. Okay, so first off, you're welcome and thank you, because oftentimes when people disagree on the internet, they aren't kind. They aren't polite. They don't, offer any sort of valid criticisms. They don't offer any sort of compliments in addition to their criticisms. It's just usually just kind of anger and response, and just not very. It's not very thought out. It's just you dumb. That sort of thing, right? And so I do really appreciate the kindness in his reply. I do appreciate the discussion about how this came from the Civil War discussion, the A24 Civil War movie, which is, and if you didn't see that video, or if you haven't seen the movie, my thoughts are that the Civil War movie, what it really is a cautionary tale about how we, one cautionary tale against war in general, but cautionary tale especially about how we shouldn't go down this path to civil war. And there no one wins in that sort of situation. There's not a really good outcome that can come from that, and so this is what I thought the movie was trying to get across to people. They even do this by having it explicitly stated that that's what the journalists were trying to do, because the journalists were war front type journalists. So they would go to wars in other countries around the globe, to send the stories back, to send the footage back, to try to caution the United States about going into these type of wars. And they said that they were unsuccessful and that somehow people still did this, and now they're trying to cover our civil war, that sort of thing. And that is something I wholeheartedly agree with. No matter how much I talk about civil separation, national divorce, I do believe that if we can't do it without war, it should not be done. We should not go into an actual civil war. And part of the reason why I endorse the idea of civil separation, national divorce, is because I don't want us to go to an actual civil war. And if we don't figure out a way to de-escalate the division, the divide in this country, it's just going to continue to escalate. We're going to have a very controversial election in November, regardless of who wins or how they win. If things continue to escalate, it's just going to get worse and worse from there. So, so this is an idea that I have, that a lot of people have, that maybe we would be better off if we just divided the country so as not to and do it peacefully so as not to have a civil war. And that's the general idea of this kind of content that I put out. Not that I really want the country to divide, um, because honestly, I don't, but I think it might be the only way to keep us from having this complete explosion of division. But anyways, okay. So again, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being kind. I really appreciate um, your pleasant comments there. As far as the disagreement, and you definitely did that respectfully also, and I appreciate that. It's a terrible idea. That's just your general idea. Terrible idea. The reason being is because we would then become a divided mess, and the enemies of the United States would be getting what they want. So here's my reply to that. You're not entirely wrong. Or I don't completely disagree with you. It's an opinion. You can't really be wrong. It's just your opinion, and I don't necessarily disagree with you. It would be very difficult to divide the country up in a way that would cause both countries to still be strong. And part of the reason why we would divide is because you know both sides do feel like the other side is holding them back or dragging them down or whatever. So maybe one country would come out a lot stronger than the other country. And there's disagreements about what that would be and how that would be. And I may talk about that a little bit in this video. Uh, but yes, it would be very difficult to divide the country in a way that it could remain strong. We would be divided, of course. That would be the purpose of it. Um, but could both sides remain strong in that division? That's one of the many hard parts of doing that sort of thing. Um, I believe that the portion of the country that would remain the United States of America would remain strong. But as you've seen from other comments, there are people that believe that the country that would remain as the United States of America would be very weak, financially speaking. Um, and I'm going to discuss that a little bit in this video as well, just to kind of go back to that whole concept, right? The other part, and this is where I mostly disagree with you. So the enemies of the United States of America, what are some of the things that they would like to see? They would like to see the United States fall. And Sometimes, because honestly, I think it might hurt them in a lot of ways if the United States fell. But more so, they just want the United States to not prevent them from doing the things that they want to do. So in that sense, kind of yes. But let's get into a little bit more detail. Um, my thought for what the United States would that remains, not the country that splits off and becomes that has develops a new constitution and a new government, but the United States that remains and reestablishes the United States Constitution. That country would pull back quite a bit from foreign affairs, not completely, but in a large amount, right? So we would go and we would say, you know what, we are far too involved in what's going on in the rest of the world, um, and we do need to pull the United States military back, pull the United States involvement back, and defend our borders. So, one, it would actually strengthen our borders because we would bring our military back. We would be focused on defending our nation above all else. Um, Defend our coast, defend our borders, defend our airspace, defend our waters. And so, in that sense, we would actually be strengthened. But yes, we wouldn't be out there involved in everybody's business. Now, I think that's a good thing, and I can see why someone would think that's a bad thing. Um, but um, but what would happen in a lot of cases, and I think, anyways, again, my opinion, what I think is that it would actually stabilize the world in a lot of ways, because the United States is kind of a destabilizing factor in a lot of aspects around the world. If we weren't involved in sorts of thing, multiple things across the world, um, they would resolve themselves, or not resolve themselves. Say like the Middle East with Israel and Palestine. Israel and West Bank, or Israel and Gaza, or Israel and Hamas, or however you want to define that conflict, right? That conflict would probably continue on, right? Because it's been continuing on for, you know, thousands of years, really, but really since the reestablishment of Israel. So, there is that. Um, so some of these conflicts would not resolve themselves, and it's not really our responsibility to resolve those conflicts. And really, we haven't resolved them, and we probably wouldn't be able to resolve them even if we remained in direct involvement, right? Um, Russia and Ukraine, on the other hand, would be resolved rather quickly, I do believe. Russia would win. That's not necessarily a good thing. They invaded a neighboring country. I'm not endorsing that. I'm not saying that that's a good thing. But without the backing of the United States, more than likely Russia would finally, in that war, they would have to negotiate terms to end the war. Ukraine would. And that we would be able to see how that falls out. And whether or not it would be a good thing or a bad thing is up to interpretation. But if Russia doesn't take over the whole of Ukraine and just wants that additional barrier against the UN, which we'll talk about in a minute or in a little bit, then I think they could come back to peaceful terms, and the conflict would end. That's a hope. It is a possibility. It's not a guarantee, of course. Um, and then other places around the world, the United States is more of a destabilizing force. Other places, we are a stabilizing force. So, here's the thing. Here's how I would envision us moving forward. And now, mind you, we would be two separate countries. So we would not have a say over what the other country does. If they want to be involved in these sorts of things, we would not have a say in that. But as far as the United States, the remaining United States, um, my thought about how the United States would move forward is, look, we are we are defending our borders, we are defending our country, and that is our focus. We will have allies, we will have treaties and allies, and that sort of thing, and we should just make it a our statement, of defense around the world, in that we will not get involved in conflicts. We will let them play out as they play out. But if you invade or attack with actual weapons, you actually conduct a war of some sort against our ally, we will help to defend them. Just as simple as that. And so we would need to go around figuring out, who our allies are, who we want that. We need better terms with that, because, oftentimes we find that we are committing lots of resources and lots of, commitments to defend other people, whereas we do not have those same commitments returned to us. And so that sort of thing. I don't want to see evil spread throughout the world, but at the same time, right now, our focus should be on strengthening who we are, because we're kind of becoming weaker and weaker as we go, rather than being, the strength that we were in the world, 100 years ago, 100 to 50 years ago, right? And so, what I'd like to see is that focus, creating a stronger United States that has a statement that we will defend our allies, but we are not going to be as involved, right? And I think that is going to see a lot of things calm down around the world, especially as it relates to how we are viewed around the world, and whether or not our enemies, as it were, would still then be our enemies. At that point, if we are not getting involved in their business without, yeah, again, other than saying no war, don't commit any sort of wartime attacks, um, and you guys figure out your situation, then I think maybe we would have less enemies around the world. Not completely. There's still people that are going to hold grudges. There's still people that are going to want to advance their desires for the world that would still see us be eliminated. But honestly, I don't think that's our enemies that we so much have to worry about. That's the world elites that we would have to worry about, as far as trying to continue to say, no, we need to encompass this United States as we had intended. And they would be the ones fighting the separation more than anybody, to be completely honest. Our enemies would just kind of see it as, hopefully some breathing room where they can, develop their own positions, and I honestly don't think that would be as bad as some people think. So we would be strengthened. We wouldn't be as much of a presence in the world, and that would be a good thing in my mind. I am not a fan of war. I do not want to see us go to war for anything, other than our national defense. And oftentimes that gets spread out to mean defending other countries that we think need to be defended for our national defense. And so, what you'd see in the new United States, you would probably see this, is that would probably be the more left leaning party again. The Republican Party would probably be that party that would still want to be highly involved around the world. And with a country founded, more focused on the Constitution, I would see them be the minority party. But I could be wrong. But that's just my ideas on it. Okay, so let's talk about some other things. Hopefully that addressed your comment. I know, like, for the most part, we kind of agree, in that, yes, we would be a divided country. Whether that's a mess or not is up for debate. Um, we would not be in the world. We would not be out in the world as big, as we are currently. Um, and so maybe our enemies might benefit from that. But hopefully I clarified my position. All right, let's talk about some other things. One of the biggest, um, pluses, which is directly connected to what I was talking about, is less war. I would be a huge fan of the United States separating, causing there to be less war. We would be less involved in wars around the world. We would be less likely to be, have a war act committed against us, because, well, one, it's really hard to commit a war act against us. That's why it doesn't happen very often, because we're on the other side of the world from most of those sorts of activities. Canada's not going to attack us. Mexico's probably not going to attack us. Um, or I should again say it again. Canada's probably not going to attack us. Mexico's probably not going to attack us. Someone would have to attack from the coasts, because they wouldn't be able to go through those countries unless they developed a partnership, which I would, which is possible but unlikely. And then, Central America down to South America is again hard to attack us from those places, other than missile attacks, which we do need to improve that. And so that's what we would do. We would strengthen our defense. We would incorporate more missile defense. We would incorporate, defense along our borders, defense along our coasts, and we would be strengthened in that. We're less likely to be attacked, and we wouldn't be involved in all these wars going around, and hopefully that doesn't result in bigger wars. Now, mind you, it could. Um, we There could then be another world war that, the United States is not involved in until it decides it has to, because someone decides to carry out an attack on us, very similar to how World War II played out. Hopefully that's not the case. It could be. I'm not saying it's not, possible, but I would imagine that that would not be what would happen. Okay, so less war around the world, but definitely less war as far as the United States being involved. That's the one of the biggest aspects of of this divided country. We wouldn't have, current elites trying to lead us into war so strongly. Um, okay, another big thing is term limits. We could definitely establish term limits early on in this process. Um, Term limits is something that is insanely popular throughout the United States, but it is not popular with the politicians, of course. So it's really hard to get the amendment passed. However, if you divide the country up and you have the remaining country that's trying to reestablish the United States Constitution as it was, and then you go through and you keep or remove the current amendments. During that process, you just continue to move forward with, do we want to add any other amendments? And one of those amendments would 100% be um, term limits. The popularity is there. There's almost no chance that our new set of politicians wouldn't agree with the term limit concept, because they would also be new politicians. For the most part, we would probably see some carryover, but we would have to basically elect a new government, and a large portion would then side with, new politicians, I would imagine, right? So the likelihood of getting term limits passed is very high, and that would be one of the biggest pluses to a civil separation, a separation of states, a national divorce, right? Because um, if you get if you if you put in place term limits in our current country, you would probably fix most of these problems that I would like to fix with a civil separation. You would be able to get rid of all of the politicians that have been there um, far too long, that want to hold power more than anything, that want to lead us into wars, that make them money, that want to do their do their stocks that cause them to become millionaires, get their speeches that help them become millionaires. Um, we'd be able to get rid of these politicians and pretty much start fresh, right? We would also need to establish some sort of term limit on federal employees, bureaucracies, those sorts of things. Get some sort of term on how long you can work as a part of the government. Um, so if we have a term limit on presidents already, 2 terms. You establish terms for Congress, um, and there's been a couple of ideas thrown around. 2 terms as each, a total number of years, um, you know, depending on where you hold office, whether no matter where you hold office, you can only be in a politician for so many years, that sort of thing. There's a couple of different ideas floating around. I don't know which one would actually end up winning, but that's my point. You would be able to then move forward from having these career politicians who have too much power and aren't civil servants, don't represent the people. More than anything, they represent their political parties, and I did discuss that in the video. I discussed in large part how it would be a benefit to at least decrease the power of the political parties, even though we couldn't technically eliminate them due to free speech and right to assemble and those sorts of things. Okay, but term limits would fix a lot of the problems that we have in this country, and really we should be able to get it passed if we just did a constitutional convention that only focused on a people-led amendment to the Constitution, that put constitutional amendment or term limits on Congress. It would pass. I know it would, but we're so divided we can't even get there, um, even though we mostly agree on that. And we would be able to move forward from there without the government being this just lifelong assignment that you get once you finally take power. Um, we would also want to have not term limits, like as how many terms, but I think you should put a length of time that you can be a Supreme Court justice. It shouldn't be a lifetime appointment, but also you shouldn't be able to get um, elected again or nominated again. You shouldn't be able to become a Supreme Court justice again. We don't want them running for office. You know, we don't want them running to be Supreme Court justices. Um, we want the same process that we have now, only you only get to be a Supreme Court justice for so long, right? And in doing that, you would also um, you wouldn't be so worried about nominating somebody who would then be on the Supreme Court justice for an even longer time. You know, because currently they usually look at older candidates, but you know, actually lately it's been some younger candidates. So, but you know, you wouldn't have to focus on only older candidates. You could focus on younger candidates who would be Supreme Court justices for however long we set it for 10, 15, 20 years, whatever it is. Um, and then they can move on and, you know, go back to some regular type of, you know, lawyer or judge position, you know, but not on the Supreme Court, that sort of thing. Okay. What else do I want to talk about in this video before I move along? UN being a part of a national body, we would not do that. We would pull out of those. We wouldn't need to be a part of any sort of international body. Sorry, international body, um, and that would be something that I believe would cause us to be less vilified around the world. Also, everybody could move forward with, you know, realizing that we were the ones propping up those bodies. And so, you know, you can start seeing, you know, international affairs be less dictated by the United States of America. And we would see how that plays out. We, as far as funding, yeah, so I did want to talk about this a little bit more again. And then I think I'm going to end it on that because this video is going to be over 30 minutes after I do this. Okay, so you know, the talk about how red states would financially collapse. Um, I disagree with that, but let's look at that. Right, a large part of what would cause that sort of thing is the idea that taxes are the biggest thing, and you won't have enough taxes to be able to support the red states. Well, here's the thing: we wouldn't be doing that sort of system at all. We would have, and the government wouldn't have the expenses that it currently has. You would bring the military back. You would defend our borders. The defense spending would decrease drastically because our focus would be on defending our borders, not on policing the world. And so the defense spending would decrease drastically. A lot of the entitlements would go away. A lot of the benefits would go away. You could continue on some of them, but in a much more controlled setting, you know, as opposed to what we currently have with like Social Security and the welfare state. Um, so you would see a system where taxes wouldn't be drained as much. Our main focus would be on rebuilding the country because we would have to give up certain things. So we would have to rebuild the military to a certain degree because, you know, if you split it between two countries, it may not be strong enough to defend the borders as they were, right? So you may need to rebuild the military. You may need to rebuild or strengthen the power grid. You may need to do some of these things because you are separating those resources out between two countries. So yes, there would be some rebuilding in some certain aspects, right? But the country itself would have far less expenses. We wouldn't have these things that are pulling the country down to the. Sorry about that. If you can hear that, it's my dryer. My washer, I think actually, my washer has stopped, and so there's a little jingle going on, letting me know, and it's still going because it is the longest thing you've ever heard in your life. Still going. Who thought that was a good idea? I mean, sure, I'd like a little alarm to let me know my washer or dryer is finished, but like an hour long. Anyways, okay, back to what I was talking about. I'm gonna wrap this up, I promise. So the country, the expenses the country would need to cover would be far less. We would leave a lot of things up to the states. The education department would end. The federal government has no need to be involved in the education department. The federal government could still have some interstate highways that they would be responsible for. However, you could also even just say each state is responsible for the highways in their state. I don't know. That's something to talk about. The Let's see what else would we be able to eliminate. There's plenty of things we would eliminate, like the FBI, CIA. Develop some very limited powered type of federal police force that would maintain certain aspects, but you wouldn't have these hands that reach out into the world and into the country and all these different aspects, creating all these problems. Let's see, what else would we? Anyways, the budget for the United States government would drastically reduce. Drastically, not even like a little bit. This is like what we really need to do to fix our debt. But we can't do it in our current state. We would be able to do it in the new country. Well, the remaining United States, really. Um, and so the budget would the focus would be on rebuilding. The focus would be on paying off the debt, because if you're dividing the country up, there's no way that you're going to assign all of the debt to one country or the other. You're going to have to split that up, and the focus absolutely should be paying off that debt, rebuilding and paying off that debt. So we may continue to have taxes. We may continue to have some sort of revenue generating aspects to the country until we are able to pay off that debt and move forward as a stronger country. And then, so actually limited taxes, that's it's a scary concept, because when you start something, it's really hard to end it. But you could build it into the initial structure of the country, that it would come to an end once we are able to actually pay off these debts. And so these states would not fail financially, um, and if they did, then we would have a solution for that. But what I'm thinking is that the decreased budget would there would be a decreased revenue also, but a decreased budget would outpace the decreased revenue. You'd have to have a balanced budget amendment anyway, so you'd be able to create a budget that pays off our existing debt, that rebuilds the country, that provides for the national defense, and a few other things that maybe we decide the federal government needs to do. And then that balanced budget will show us that the revenue can be decreased as the budget decreases once we finally get through that initial rebuilding phase. That's my thoughts on it. I really don't think that the states would collapse. I think that we would be doing just fine financially. In fact, I think we'd be stronger than ever, and we would allow the markets to work and be able to generate the GDP that we would need to create the revenue, rather than percentages. We'd probably go to some sort of flat tax that has a decreased thing as the budget requirements decrease. Have it built in that way. You could say we're starting with a 15% flat tax, goes to 10% after the debt is paid off, or whatever we end up deciding, right? Um, and then people would pay much less in taxes. They would be able to move forward building businesses. We would have less regulations, and obviously there would still need to be some regulations, because we have to make sure that there's not some sort of takeover of everything. We also have to make sure that there's not widespread pollution. We're not going to worry about so much the fear tactics of like global warming and climate change so much. But if we focus on, you know, keeping pollution low, then we're benefiting those things that people are worried about anyways, without focusing on government control and high taxes to fix climate change, which they never explain how that will happen, right? We would just focus on keeping a clean country, a beautiful country, take care of our wildlands. The government wouldn't have control over all the parks, but we would still have national parks. The beauty of this country would be strengthened, not only remain intact, but would strengthen. That's my thoughts on everything. This video is going very long, and so I may do more videos like this in the future. We shall see. All right, everybody, take care. Have a good day.